All right. So welcome back to Consciously Curious with Katie and Sarah. And today we're going to talk about, by the way, we never have these scripted and it is all off the cuff, but we decided right before recording that we wanted to talk about the different aspects of what we're reaching when you're doing hypnotherapy, specifically parts, right? Like we want to understand like what are these parts and how to describe these in a better way. And then like if those certain parts have like specific names that we can describe and like how that would feel and like what are the experiences both from like a client perspective and our like, behind the scenes what a practitioner experiences. So Sarah of everybody I know would be like the one I would send somebody to for if they wanted to understand their parts, because Sarah's actually really, really good at this. And so I thought Sarah could do a better job of explaining parts theory and like, well, I'm just going to let you take it away. Like, what are the different parts inside of us and like, how do we access these when we are using the tool of hypnotherapy?
Right. And why do we access these in the first place? And I would say if anybody's curious about getting more alignment within their system and if you're experiencing any type of stuckness or if you're
She's everybody.
experiencing right, if you're like stuck in your life on something, if you're
Who's
having
not
trouble
stuck?
making
Yeah.
right, if you're having trouble making a decision, if you feel like you're like kind of stuck in old programs or ways of being or ways of thinking, it's likely that you have some dysfunction in your parts and the parts of you, these different parts inside of us. And by dysfunction, I just mean maybe they need to be updated. Maybe they
Like
need
that.
to be brought into the light. Maybe you just need to kind of see what's going on inside of you. And I got really interested in this work because I was experiencing those things. And of course, I still do.
Mhm.
I'm a human being. I can always look at, find probably somewhere else that I could bring a part into the light.
Totally.
But in particular, parts came about as a therapist, especially the creator of internal family systems, for instance,
Right.
he started talking to his clients and he realized that his clients had almost like a family inside of them of different voices, different perspectives, different aspects of the self that may have differing opinions, differing views, differing ways of approaching things. And some of them may be almost like aspects of you from different ages of yourself.
Totally.
Some of them may be these like protector elements that are trying to like watch out for you. There's all these different aspects of the self, but it's almost like a family. And
I
so
always
just
feel like it's like a family at the Thanksgiving dinner table. And it's like you got your uncle that's got like bad jokes, and then you got like all the kids at the kids' table, but like each kid has a different personality, which what like you're gonna go into. But it's like a really bad Thanksgiving dinner of like people just saying and all these things, and like that's you.
oh yeah, it's like an unhinged Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, and that's inside all of us. And it's
Yeah.
okay to notice that within yourself and it's actually, I think, freeing to realize that's part of the human experience is to have these different aspects of self within
Yeah.
us. Of course, there is, in this theory, there is the idea that we have a one self, that is the self, that is almost outside of and like leads all the different
Mhm.
parts. And
Right.
so that's important to notice too, is that um, it's not about necessarily like these different parts of us, they're not ourself. And so we talk about the higher self sometimes,
Mhm.
whether you call it the higher self, the self, it doesn't really matter. But the main thing here is about kind of getting all the parts on the same page. Like, and
And can I
hypnotherapy.
ask something
Yeah.
of like when you were saying a minute ago, sorry to interrupt, but I think this might be an interesting way. What is, when you said the word programming, like at the very
Mhm.
beginning, you're like, we have this programming, this outdated programming. Like, how does that tie in? Because I find like that's not everybody realizes they've been programmed.
Right. And we all have been programmed. Like sometimes there's parts within you that may actually be almost like the voice of your parents, either your mom or
Totally.
your
I
dad.
got a
Could
loud
be
one.
right. Yeah, like there's probably that. Your critic has probably been programmed to look out for certain cues that would say, like, oh, this is bad behavior, don't act like this. And when you really look at it, maybe that is something that you heard when you were 5 years old,
Totally.
you know? And so what I'm really talking about is subconscious programs that may be running the show, because what some people don't realize is that our parts can take over. I love the consideration of like the movie Inside Out.
Right.
If you've seen those movies, where there's these different parts at the table and they're taking turns kind of running the show. And that's what happens with us. Our parts can run the show, but really ideally what we want to have is like this round table where our parts are kind of brought up to speed and they
Yeah.
can say what they need to say. We hear them out with compassion,
Ooh,
with
I like that. The
love.
hearing part. Yeah, the hearing
Yeah.
in.
Even the parts that you're like, oh no, banish that one. Oh my God. No, I never want to
Because
hear.
what happens when you don't hear them, right? Tell me
Right.
that. Because I think
Yeah.
that's part of the theory, right? Is like you
Hmm.
need to hear them because what happens when you do banish them? What's the
Exactly.
downside?
I mean, they're going to get louder, they're going to get angrier, they're going to find more ways to kind of sabotage probably what you really would like. And a lot of
Right.
it is just because you're not listening to them. You're not hearing them. Maybe they're terrified. Maybe they're parts of you that are
Totally.
really scared. So let's say that you're an entrepreneur or you have inspiration to be an entrepreneur, but there's a part of you that's really scared about the insecurity of money, the insecurity of putting yourself
Yeah.
out there.
Responsibilities.
That part of you may show up as a protector, saying, like, oh, you know what? It would be really unwise to do that. You don't know what would happen to you financially. What about your benefits? What about these things? And some people might even call that like the ego or something. And if
Right.
you were to look at it in like greater spiritual terms. And so they might say, like, that ego is not your friend. That part of you is like bad part. They're just worrying about nothing. But what would really help that part move forward would be if you heard it out, if you sat with it, which is where hypnotherapy comes in as an amazing tool to help you really deeply connect with these different parts of you. So let's imagine in that same scenario that you took time to actually listen to that part. Okay, you don't just feel the fear and do it anyway. Maybe you actually have to listen to what that fear is saying. Doesn't mean you actually act on it, but you have to hear it out. You have to hear out that part of you that's really scared of showing up, the part of you that's really scared of being bullied, the part of you that's maybe scared of what people might say about you, and like hear it. And at that point, it's almost like reparenting that part. And that's
Yeah.
when, you can do this work on your own, but a hypnotherapist or another, an IFS specific practitioner, depending on, who you're drawn to, can really help you bring some understanding and compassion to that part.
Totally.
And that's when you can move forward. Maybe then suddenly that's when that part of you that was really scared and trying to hold you back from this dream is suddenly has a new job. It's
Yeah.
like updated, it's on board. It's like, okay, you're right. Like we do have savings. Like we do have this figured out. Hey, you know what? We're actually 35 years old. We can fucking do this. Like
Right.
we're not 15 years old anymore. Like maybe that part was really outdated. You brought it up to speed
Right.
now. Now it's going to be your number one accountant, like helping you plan for
So they
things.
need like tasks. They
Yeah,
need
then you
like
can give
things
them.
to do.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
can maybe now that's actually a part that wants to be creative and like wants to be a part of the visionary process too. Like bring it on. Like it's a really busy mental part, but what if now it gets to dream up some really cool marketing for you? Like
Right.
that's the huge unlock is when these
And
parts are brought up and now they can do what
mm,
you'd actually probably like them to do, and you get to move forward together.
I'm curious from a practitioner's perspective if you do this, like, or just like your preferences, I guess. Do you ever give your parts like names and personas, like personalities or like visuals, aesthetics and stuff like that? Like I know some people
Oh
do
yeah.
that. Like how do you like to work with the parts? Because like when we find them in trance,
Hmm.
usually people can distinguish like, ooh, there's that part of me and ooh, there's that part of me. Like people can actually distinguish it, which is interesting because I think in your waking life, you're just like, I don't know. It's hard to like tell. But when you're in trance,
Hmm.
you can actually like see them and like feel
Yeah.
them. So how do you, as a practitioner, I'm just curious, because I love to know our differences.
That's
What
that
do you do then?
that's why I love doing this work in trance. It doesn't have to be a super deep trance, but at least a trance because it allows a lot more information, visuals, metaphors, Like
Yeah,
the actual persona and character of these parts really comes forward. And
totally.
for me personally, in my own experiences and for my clients, I find that leads to even more mutational experiences where they experience like massive change and
Mhm.
massive healing with those parts because it really feels like something has occurred. They
Yeah,
saw it, they felt it, and
totally. And
and
it
it's
has like a
because
little, it's like doing
real
something.
people.
Yeah,
Yes.
like I had a client once, she named one, hers looked like Tar Baby, like that old like thing where it was like all black and gooey and it was like sticky and it was like stuck to the ground and she called it Sticky Ricky. Sticky Ricky is just sitting in the corner and that's the version of me that doesn't want to move, is like stuck and like I can't, and it's like and it was something really, like you said, it was like metaphorical, it was visceral, you visualize it. There was something really helpful about that. So
Yeah.
otherwise, like, how do you talk about it, articulate that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Katie, you'll love this because I know you work with somatics as well, because not only is it visual, it
Yeah,
can it be, visual, can you name the parts and that type of thing? I haven't really named mine, but the visuals really
like in
help
the
me.
body.
But it can also show up in the body. And so you can ask the
Yes.
person, like, where in your body do you feel this part? And I can give an
Yes.
example. Like I had a part come forward as there was this protector part, and this protector part literally looked like a ninja, kind of like dressed in like
Mm,
all black, and it would
oh,
surround itself around me and put itself over my mouth. So I felt it at my mouth, at my throat, and
mm,
around my back, like protecting me, almost like was worried that someone was gonna, get me, and we were like hiding in the
mhm.
closet. That's how it kind of felt. And so
Yes.
seeing it like that, feeling the visceral,
Mhm.
and then through the process of working with that part, feeling it actually take its hand away, take its other hand away, like giving me this space, coming out of the closet with me, and that little other part I was working with at the same time, that was like this little creative girl that just wanted to express. And she showed up as like a girl with one of those ribbon band, like those like ribbon twirler things. And
Yeah, I
like she
love
just wanted
those.
to like play and create. But there was that protector side of that was like, it's not safe to do that. And that was the one that
Totally.
kept me kind of covered like that. And so when I was working through the process of reconciling those two parts, and this was like one hour session, like it was really fast. I have since then felt so much more unlock in my throat and my voice with speaking, with like
Yeah,
asking for things I need, with expressing myself, literally. And I have been working on those throat blockages for years.
that's such a cool technique. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know, you work with somatics. I know you also, look at this through the lens of like inner child healing. So for you, as as we're talking about this, what's coming up for you in terms of how you work with inner child healing as well? Because I know that's really connected to IFS, especially with the parts often being like children
Children.
at times.
Yeah. God, I love you. I love that ninja story though, by the way, because is that not, and I like how you were able to like look at two like stuck together parts, because I was going
Yeah.
to ask that earlier of like, how often do our parts like team up? When you're like, and then you can make that part of you the accountant, and like that part of you can be the one that does this because like their propensity for a certain task, right? And I realized like now through your story that you can probably do it in a good positive way, but I bet you when you unravel the parts, they're like all connected because they made some kind of relationship a
Mhm.
long time ago too, right? Like you were saying, like you have this really excited, like, free-spirited little inner child that was like loved to do the little ribbon and everything, but then it was protected and held back by this other part. And those two kind of go together. Just as soon as she gets enough freedom to like do what she wants, she gets this
Yeah.
again until you separate them. So I really love that story because it shows it's so nuanced, isn't it?
Mhm.
When we were talking about the somatics, it reminded me of a client I had that when we were going back into some negative things in her childhood, when you say, like, where do you feel that version of you? It was her legs lost feeling. Her legs became numb. And it was such a metaphor because she couldn't run away, right? Like she was disembodied. And so one of the things that we were able to do is like make her legs feel useful again, right? Like stomp her legs, get herself back into her legs when she brought up this memory, like actually use her legs and make her feel grounded and within her body again. And you're right, like we recognize the parts in these like metaphors sometimes, but a lot of times they do. They live in the body, and it's often really metaphorical. So like the fact that your throat chakra and your mouth were covered and then you lost your voice, like it's no mistake that it was there, that it was stuck, right?
Mhm.
Or even like you might have even like had it when the ninja was like holding you, you might have kind of like cowered a little bit. And so it's like they all kind of go together. I find that's really helpful when you do this work to be familiar with metaphors and to be familiar with the parts of the body that we have these cute little like sayings, of like, like it's like no weight off my back or whatever, like we have these things where it's like, oh, it was a lot of weight on his shoulders, or it was like responsibility, right? And sometimes like those little like sayings, when we study this from the perspective of the parts in us, it is in the body parts that you would guess that it would be, right? Like the throat, or like if you have too much responsibility and frustration, it's like in your shoulders or your back, etc. And so then learning how to like move that out and process it out is, yeah, the work of somatics, which we could talk more about in a minute. But I wanted to go back to the word inner child, because I think that's what I like the way you describe parts. That's why I always say Sarah's your person, man. If you want to have somebody like that's really knowledgeable about like the different parts and the way that they interact, Sarah's your girl. I tend to look at it from the perspective of the inner child, because you can have a million inner childs, but it's like the different ages of the inner children and the different life stages of that inner child. So for example, that little like ribbon girl, she might have been a certain age and she might have been a certain like carefree moment in your life, but you might also have an inner child who was, I know, I'll just say for me, the scaredy cat, right? And like she had a fear of new situations and making new friends. And, so when I notice what happens with me and a lot of my clients from the lens of inner child is, if you imagine like those nesting dolls, like we love those nesting dolls, and you're the outside doll as the adult, and you're like, I'm in charge, everybody come with me. And like, for some reason, like you don't feel like you're making momentum, or like the stuckness we talked about. It's usually because there's one inner child or more inside of the nesting doll that's like, not going, no, and it's like similar to the parts work of like, you have to listen to that inner child and spend time with that inner child and understand what that inner child needs. So that's usually the perspective I go with, is I'll say, go back to the time, go back to the ages that your inner child needs to heal. And I'll get like 3 to 5 different ages in one session, but it'll usually be, just like you said, an age and stage that isn't feeling acknowledged in this current life,
Mhm.
right? And
Yep.
it's like an age that like, let's just give a really easy example. Maybe like your relationship, you're having a lot of fights with your partner. And when you go back to the age of when your parents used to say, God, you're too much. Just stop crying. You're too much. Everything's too hot, too cold. You're too much. And then you realize, oh, that's the version of me that feels ridiculed and threatened and judged by my partner right now. It's that age. It's not current me. It's that age me. And so you go and you spend time with that version of you who was ridiculed and judged by your parents, etc., or whoever, and you love them and you care for them and you reparent them, just like you're saying. I think maybe that's just all of life is reparenting. Should we
Yeah.
just leave it at that? The end.
And like I even saw the sweetest like reel or short like online of saying like all relationships are also reparenting each other
Yeah,
and
I
like
think so.
helping each other's inner child heal too. And I think like really good relationships, that's exactly it. And so
Yes,
obviously we can do that to ourselves, but our partners, our relationships, our friendships, our big important relationships in our lives, like we're also there to
totally.
kind of help each other grow up the rest of the way.
And the best part is when you get that vocabulary. So for example, I had a blowout fight with my husband around Christmas time, and it was adorable because it was over a noisy toy that my husband bought for my kids, when for the last 7 years of my life, I have said to everyone that will listen to me, please do not buy my kids noisy toys. So I was mad because this noisy toy was going to be annoying to me. Okay. And so I yelled, please, why would you buy me this noisy toy? He was mad because all he heard was, you tried something, but it wasn't good enough. And so it was a huge fight. But really, when we finally made up, we said, I'm sorry, my inner child is hurting your inner child, because my inner child was being told, you're too much, because he's like, it's a noisy toy, get over it. And I was like,
Mhm.
my whole life I've been told to get over it. So it's like my wound, my inner child
Yep.
wound is that I'm too much. But his inner child wound was that he was not enough, that he's never enough.
Mhm.
He got an A plus. Why
Can
didn't you
never
get
do
an A
enough.
plus plus?
Yeah.
Like that was his experience. His wound is that he's never enough. And so when those two bipoles, like go at it, it's not your adult self that's upset. It's your little baby child that was like parented in that way. And so we
Mhm.
literally apologized to each other the next day by saying, I'm really sorry my inner child wounded your inner child. And we laughed and we're like, yeah, I guess like we just have to be better about that and parent ourselves better. Because you're
Mhm.
right. I think that's all relationships are.
Oh, and I think it's a helpful perspective to take too, because it takes you one step out of the it helps remove you from the situation by one step. So you can observe it and say, what's actually happening here? This is not, I didn't do enough. This isn't, I'm too much. It's actually, those are like thoughts and voices inside of us already
And
that
a
we just
narrative,
triggered
like
within
a
each
little
other.
narrative. Yeah. Like a
Yeah.
little part, like a plot point that you really
Yeah.
like.
Because,
Sometimes we get addicted to those plot points too. Like they're
hmm
good. Like actually tell me more about the names of the parts, because I is there a victim? Like the victim? Like, because when I think of parts, I often think of like archetypes, but I think there's like specific names for parts, right? Or is it like open? Because like I love the victim.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, there's
when it's
all
my turn
different
to be the
names.
victim, I'll really embrace that part sometimes.
Right. No, there are different names within like internal family systems specifically. I don't get too lost in that structure. I do think it's
Okay.
helpful to recognize different parts, like ones that are actually coming forward as protectors, as a critic,
Yeah.
as yeah, I think victim
Is
is
the
helpful.
saboteur like anything? Like, like the saboteur is usually a protector, like in
Yeah,
disguise.
I
Because I
mean,
guess they're in
usually that's how
disguise
it comes up.
sometimes, right?
Pretty much all the time. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of times they're disguised and they're saying one thing, but truly they have an intention that is to protect. That's what I see a lot in my work is a lot of protectors that are actually
Yeah.
like sabotaging something that actually have a lot of thoughts that the person is very annoyed by, that they want to get rid of them. And honestly, the first time I came to parts healing myself, I wasn't ready to sit compassionately with my parts and
I
actually hear
bet.
them out. And I was like, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
You can't
I
get
like
rid of
doing
your
that.
parts. Like, I'm
Right.
like, I tried to go into it being like, God, I can't wait to get rid of this voice. Like, so sick of hearing the
Okay,
same.
really, I want you to hammer this home. When you do parts therapy, you mean you're not trying to get rid of them? What are you really trying to do? Like, for really, hammer that home, because I think that's what people
Yeah.
come to this. They come to a hypnotherapy session because they want to like get rid of something.
Well, I
But
think it's the
sometimes it's not
same.
about that, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same like spiritual seekers that are trying to transcend the ego. Like, good luck with that. Okay. The ego is going to put up the biggest fight, and you're going to have way more
Mhm.
contentiousness in your ocean than any peace from just overcoming it. I love this saying, the ego doesn't want to be healed, it wants to be heard.
Ooh, I like
And
that.
it's the same thing with your parts. So if you go into the situation saying, I'm so sick of this part, I never want to hear from it again, my job would then be to help you find some places to connect with this part, to recognize where it's really coming from so that you can elicit some compassion for the part. Because only once you can understand it and hold compassion in your heart for it, can it be brought up out of that, difficult, I would say, frequency, like maybe a painful
Yeah.
frequency and vibration into one of more love and light.
I like that. When you were talking about the ego and how the ego doesn't want to be healed, it wants to be heard. It reminded me there's like a Jungian concept, Carl Jung, for those of you, the famous psychoanalyst, and he talks about how the first half of our life is creating the ego, and then the second half of our life is expanding from the ego. And one of these books I had read once gave me such a beautiful visual metaphor for that. And what it was is like in the first half of your life, imagine you crafting your ego is you creating one of those grappling hooks, those things that you like see on TV and movies where it's like you put it, it's like it's stuck in the ground and then you like use a rope to like belay down into a cave, right? Okay, so they're like, imagine you're like crafting this or a carabiner or something that you like use that keeps anchor into the ground. And so you're just crafting it. And then at midlife, you actually put that like grappling hook into the ground and you go down below the surface of your ego to understand what's really going on in your subconscious. And so you understand who's really at play, but
Mhm.
it's vital to have the ego as the thing that's anchoring you to reality because you have
Yeah.
to go back up into that reality because you can't live in your unconscious. You can't live in those higher realms. You can't actually exist daily in that state. Like you have to have the ego. And so you might as well use the ego as the anchor, the grappling hook that keeps you tethered to reality. It doesn't mean it has to be in charge, but it's
Hmm.
actually a really helpful anchor. And I loved that metaphor because it's like you said, you can transcend the ego, but you can't get rid of it
Exactly.
by design.
Exactly. As long as you're in a human form, having some type of human experience, that ego is going to keep you hooked in. And
Yeah.
I think that I love what you just shared. I
I
love
like
that
that. Yeah.
metaphor. It's really helpful. I was leading a class one time on the ego and like understanding the ego, and I had someone attend who claimed that he had gotten rid of his ego. He no longer had a name. He
I
no
know a guy
longer
like
had
that.
desires. He was no longer like really, a person or whatever. And um, although he had a lot of desires as he was adding things into the chat nonstop, like spamming the chat with his philosophies and everything. So people were really curious about his existence then. They're like, what do you mean? Like, okay, so you don't have any desire, like you don't have any like thoughts about things on your own. Like the ego is there for a reason. Like it grounds us into this experience. And there's a reason why in this experience we're focused inward on ourselves. Like you may feel kind of selfish sometimes, but if we were a collective construct, what would be the point in being in a body
Yeah.
right now? Like we're in a body, we have to be internally focused. And I think the ego helps us stay internally focused. And exactly like you said, do we let it run the show? No, it's a part of us. We let ourselves run the show if we can, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you like basically try to throw it in the dumpster every day when it has something to say.
Yeah, because it might be really helpful, that little like narrative that you created as an ego, you
Yeah,
know?
maybe something to be understood, to hear it
Yeah.
out and then like reassure it. I think that's what the self does. It can help hear from, okay, imagine like a king is sitting up on his throne and there's all these different like people, his citizens come in and they have some complaints, they have things to share. Sometimes I feel like parts therapy is a little bit like that, where the
Well, I
self
like
is
that. Keep
sitting
going.
there and receiving people and like receiving the parts that have something to say. And the ego's there and the ego's like, I got some problems. I'm really nervous about this. Not sure about that. Not sure about this. And then the self, the king, queen up there on the throne, they can, welcome in the ego and reassure it and just like let it be heard.
You're
You don't even have to
right.
do anything from it. But once you hear it, at least you can take it. It's like,
Oh
can
my
sit
God, you're
down,
right.
can go back into
You're
the
right.
present.
It's like a bad town hall meeting where like you
Yes.
just have to get up there and be heard. And
Yeah.
like, maybe there's like other people, other parts in your consciousness that also are like, here, yeah, remember that time in third grade when you peed your pants? See, that guy's got to something. We don't want that to happen. Like they remember it. They all remember it and they're like on it with you. Right. And so
Yeah.
it's like that's where I see, because like up until this conversation, I hadn't really thought about like the piggybacking that parts have on each other. But it's
Oh,
like
I mean, there's
there
always
are a lot.
interplay. Like,
They
I mean, that's why
piggyback.
it's family systems. It's almost like doing family therapy for your parts inside of
Yeah.
you. And that's why each one has to be heard. And typically, if one's coming forward, it's connected to another strong one, another narrative that's pretty big inside of you. Um, just like in my example that I shared before.
Okay, here's a question that I'm just curious about. I think I know what I would maybe say. So maybe at the end I'll share what I would say, but I want to know your perspective because you've done a lot more from the like client side, like when you've been the client and like the patient of the parts therapy
Mhm.
is Do you then find that as a result of healing some like dramas in the inner families, that you then have better actual family dynamics afterwards? And if so, how? And if not,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah. I mean, I think if those parts that just got therapy are now kind of up to speed, they're up to date on you now, your family system now, and then the self has regained control over the motions forward, you're going to have better family dynamics as well. At least you're going to show up more as your true self in your
Yeah.
family dynamics. So, actually, a lot of my internal family system sessions have been focused on issues that were basically coming up in my interactions with my husband and with my family,
Yeah.
my little small family now. I have my husband and my two kids, right? And with my husband, a lot of it was like expressing myself, expressing my needs. Like, and let me tell you, he is the most sensitive, in tune husband I could ever ask for. And he's there to meet and deliver on any need that I have within reason. He'll tell me if it's not reasonable, but he's there to support me. So it was absolutely something within my system that held me in fear and held me in that place of, not feeling safe to share, which is funny because I literally had a part that was holding me,
Right.
back like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I resolved that part and I would say like brought it into the light, brought it into, today's date, since then I have noticed that I even if I feel it kind of coming in to be like, I don't know about this, let's just retreat.
Mhm.
I at least myself can say, remember, we talked about this. It's safe to share now. Remember, we talked about this. It's safe to express.
I like
And
that.
so I'm able to show up
And
as
do you
more of my
feel
true
more
self.
safe? Like it actually
Yeah,
works?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I feel a lot more safety in my body, and I it can even acknowledge with him and say, whew, I'm noticing that protector part is coming up. Kind of scared to share this right now, but this is my
Mhm.
request. And
I
then
love
he
that you
can
can do
even
that in
say,
your relationship. When
oh,
like the other partner gets the words correctly, like the jargon, they're like, I think this is your inner protector coming in. Like I like that they can like validate that they're not like, oh
yeah.
God, because that
Oh,
is sometimes
yeah.
part of it, isn't it? With relationships is like educating when you go through something like a therapy. Like these
Hmm.
are things that I've learned, and here's how I describe that. Like it's an analogy, but it's like this, and that's good that he
Yeah.
gets it.
Oh yeah, no, we always share our notes on like what came up and what we noticed, so that way we can always call back to it and even mention for the other person, oh, I'm noticing that part. Is that part coming up right now? Like, does that part have
Good.
anything to do with this, what you're trying to feel, what you're feeling right now? And so it does help a lot, but I find the vulnerability and sharing
Mm,
really, really helps. Although I don't think it's important for every relationship, but what's most important is your own self-awareness for sure.
love
Which I
that.
should mention, I would say, internal family systems and this type of like healing process, it's not necessarily like a silver bullet or like a one time
Right.
and you're like fixed now forever. And I don't even like that terminology,
What?
but
I want my money back.
I know I'm using the terminology from maybe what a part of mine would like to see or something. Um, it takes continued self-awareness and continued check-ins. But I think
Yeah,
what's really helpful about it is that now you do have awareness there where I can feel that part that I've already identified coming up again. And I can
totally.
feel like that old pattern coming up. And then I can make a different choice.
Yes. Yes. Especially like, when we were talking about ages, like with like putting it in the lens for inner child stuff, all of a sudden for me, I can say to myself, that's 14-year-old Katie. Like that's
Yeah.
not this Katie. Like that's the story you're telling yourself that like everybody hates me because one time I wasn't invited to a party. And it's like, no, that's 14-year-old Katie. Like it's different
Yeah.
now. The context is different. And like you can kind of
Hmm.
take yourself out of the narrative because I think that's just who we are as human beings. We love stories. We love narratives. We love being, experts on like it's going to be like this every time because that one time and it's not like that. It can
Hmm.
change, it can evolve, it can be different. And yeah, that's while you were talking and I was trying to think of what my answer was going to be about like the family thing about like
Hmm.
does it help with families. And I would say The way I've noticed the difference with me and my clients is when we do the inner child work, if there's another person in the story that they're watching when they go to heal, then later on in the session, I bring back that person's energy and we try to understand the soul contract. So this is where it goes into the spiritual realm, right? Because I think that there's always like a component of you and I's work that there's like a spiritual perspective of it. And so I often will say, okay, like have the energy of your mom present and your energy, and now they're gonna have a conversation, and I'll have like, the mom's gonna tell you like why you were in this life, what you were supposed to learn from her, and what is she supposed to learn from you, and how is that
Mm.
going? And usually it's like amazing. People don't understand how it works, but it's like it's coming back and forth, and your understanding of what your agreement was is easy to get when you're in trance. But I think what's really cool is I always give the opportunity to have like a knob to turn it up or down, because I think a lot of times we make these agreements in our families when we're in the spiritual realm. And when we're in the spiritual realm, we're so much more ambitious and we're so much more like, we are like, yeah, just beat me a lot when I'm a kid. And then I'll have all this empathy for other people. I'll be fine. And then, like, when you actually get beat a lot as a kid, that really fucks your life up. Right. And so then when you go back into these spiritual perspectives of like, what was I supposed to learn from my mom? Oh, well, your mom was going to abuse you because it was going to teach you empathy. But it's like, can I turn that down? Because I think I bit off way more than I can chew. And so I'll have
Mm.
somebody like physically turn a knob down of like how much that influences them so they can feel almost like a volume, like and the weird part is it works. Like, I don't understand how it works. It's a spiritual thing. Usually it's like in reference to like the way you feel about a person and the way that person's like engaging with you. So you're like, how is that person's behavior changing just by me doing that work, right? But there has to be some kind of spiritual connection with our agreements with one another, that when we're accessing it in trance and we're trying to manipulate the levels with those knobs, that it actually does change. And I think like I want to have an answer to people of like, here's how it works, but I don't know, but it
Mhm.
works.
Yeah, no, my brain right now is literally like, how does that work? Let me explain it. Da, da, da.
I know I want
But
to so bad.
I do think that we have at some level control over our experience, especially in regards to perspective. And
Right.
what you just talked about is taking that client through perspective, understanding the underlying lesson and reason why that happened to them. And that gives them a perspective that actually allows for them to also change how they react to it today.
Good point.
Because in that understanding, there is, again, some distance created. And putting
Right.
that knob down is creating even more distance to the
Yeah.
reaction of the story that was
Yeah.
just, the focus of that
Yeah.
time.
And you can even have a whole bunch of knobs where you're like, okay, now I also want to feel like every time I'm around my mom, I want to feel safe. And so I'm going to take the safety knob and go dial it all the way up. Right. And
Mm,
so it's like there's different ways of like metaphorically understanding a way to approach a relationship that we
mhm.
can influence in hypnotherapy. And again, how does that work? Like, I'm not entirely positive, but I like the way you're describing it. Like, it could just be a perspective shift, but either way, it helps. It
Yeah.
always helps.
Well, and I'm not saying that perspective shift is outside of the like spiritual realm. I'm
Right.
not saying that the perspective shift
Could be
is
both.
separate from the knob turning. I think it's
Mhm.
the entire process because that knob is also a metaphor for the energy that you're letting in, the focus time that you're letting in, those thoughts that you're letting in, turning it down, making the flow less and less. And when you have that higher perspective, some distance between you and the story that you were reacting to constantly, all the knobs naturally turn down. But sometimes I do think it's really helpful for us. We're metaphorical beings, we're storytelling machines. When
Yeah.
we have a story to say, remember, I turned all these knobs down, I'm safe now. I remember I turned all these knobs
Yeah.
down, my sensory, I can handle
And
this
like,
now.
remember the it came off, like the hand
Exactly. Remember, we
came
took that
off.
hand off, it came off.
That's
So
influencing us. Yeah.
these metaphors like they are, I mean, our subconscious speaks through metaphor. and
Correct.
and in spiritual terms, if we get into the like spiritual aspects of things, a lot of like spirit talks to us through metaphor too. Our guides are often talking to us through metaphor. So
Yeah.
the whole thing, like if you boil down language into the very basics, it's a series of like metaphor.
Yeah. You're right.
I mean, the word the
Yeah.
doesn't actually mean anything unless it's a part of some
Part of
metaphor.
another
It has to,
phrase.
it
Yeah.
has to,
Hmm.
it has to sit in something. And so
Yeah.
when we have better understanding of the stories, it really does enhance our perspective so that we can create distance, so that we can have awareness, which enables choice, which enables change.
Yeah. So
Just
let me
got it.
ask you this. Let's say you're a client that's like, besides feeling stuck, what would feel like the before that would be like parts is for me, like, or inner child is for me. Like, I'll try to think of what I would say for inner child. But like, what would you say? Like, let's say you're a client that wanted to explore parts therapy. What is the before? And then after we both say the befores, we can say how you feel after. But like, what would you say? Like, you're gonna be most likely feeling like X, and that's how you'll know parts would work for you.
I'd say if you feel torn in some way,
Mm.
torn around making a decision, if you feel like you've been teetering on the line of one foot in, one foot out, if you feel like your life keeps creating like the same patterns and you just don't want to be in that same pattern anymore, maybe same patterns in your relationships, in your career. Uh, I see a lot of people who have gone through traditional therapy models for a long time and they felt like they didn't get any
Yeah,
changes. They weren't
yeah,
experiencing change. And I'm not saying that's not a good modality for a lot of folks, but people who do transition over into parts work, into hypnotherapy work, a lot of times that's more focused on the shifting that allows for change in a person's life, the transformational process, instead of getting, staying in old narratives, repeating them, just kind of rehashing trauma. Parts work, or even the hypnotherapy work that we do on a greater scale, Katie, it's really about that transformational process. How can we create these shifts in energy? How can we create the shifts in awareness that actually lead a client towards change? So after going through this work, I would say people probably feel more like themselves because
yeah.
their self is able to take the
Hmm.
lead in their
The big
life.
self. Yeah.
Yeah,
Higher
exactly.
self. Hmm.
And they feel more aligned and they feel like they're making progress in their lives. I mean, that's been the case for me, and that's what I've heard from my clients too. What are your thoughts on that?
That's good. And in the middle of that amazing diatribe, I found a fish that I was sitting on and it hurt me. Uh, this is how I was like, what
Like
is under
mother
me?
life.
This is a fish from my child. So I that was a part of me that I explored. It was a fish. No, I love the way you describe things. I learn so much from you all the time. I think for my perspective of like, okay, before, like the before part, usually someone, like you said, stuck, but they're feeling disconnected. Like they're feeling
Mm.
disconnected from the golden thread that like weaves through their life. Like they feel disjointed in the sense of like they're just kind of going through the motions. Um, or they feel hurt or wounded, but in a way that is like hard to put your finger on. Or they feel like unfamiliar or disembodied with themselves, similar to what you were saying, right? So it's like that's why this work is so similar. Or perhaps they just want to feel like they have a better understanding of that higher self or that like outside exterior nesting doll running the show, instead of having like somebody always like, a part of them or a child in them, like taking the reins and taking control or like sitting in the back of being like, I'm not doing that. So I think having more conscious awareness and control over the parts or the children within them. And then the afterwards is so similar to what you said. You just feel whole. You feel more you. You feel more loved and loving.
Mm.
You feel more accepting and
Hmm.
compassionate. and playful. I think too, like something cool that's been happening in my office that is not in my control is just kind of like happening consistently in the last several sessions of when people are doing the inner child sessions, they're actually not going back to the bad times, they're going back to the good times. And like accidentally, because I'll just say, like, go back to a time that your inner child wants you to see and heal. But they'll go back to times that were good. And I think what's nice about that is I find so many of us as adults, but also like post-pandemic adults and like, post-modern tech adults, we don't have fun anymore. We don't have fun. We're like constantly like being, having to like do our work on our phones, like no matter, everybody can reach us. We're always having to be responsible. We're always having to like put other people's needs first. And I think when we go back to our inner children, so many of them are the ribbon girl that you were talking about. And they're so like free spirited and they're dancing and they're doing like silly stuff. And then watching even myself personally bring that back in to the world with no apologies. I think that's what happens to people. Like, I'll just say a funny example because I couldn't believe I was the only one that did this. My kids' school had a big foam party where it's like soap bubbles and all the kids were like jumping into the foam. And they're like, parents, come on in. And I ran in and I was jumping and I was throwing all the bubbles and I was like, this is amazing. I was the only one. I was the only
Wow.
one. And this one woman came up to me. She's like, I'm so jealous that you're in there. I'm like, come in with me. But it's like, I think I have really unlocked that child in me so
Mhm.
much that that child, whatever age, 8 years old, was like, hell yeah, let's go. And I think we need that. We need that because those are who feed us. Those are who fuel us. Those are who we need to like keep us going when it's like the adulthood, which fucking sucks, which just can be really stressful, is
Mhm.
too much, right? It's
Mhm.
too much. And so we need those children to like guide us and lead us.
Gosh, sometimes those kids are way more wise than our adult masks that we put on. And I'd say that the kid's self, that like childlike wonder and play and imagination, that's just their true self. It just got
Yeah.
like stifled and told like, oh, that's too much. That's not welcome here. That's not professional. That's not here. Whatever the message was. But I actually think that's just true self. And so I know that's one thing I love about you, Katie, is we're really open with each other and playful and imaginative
Yeah.
and like not afraid to look a fool. She
Yeah.
just pushed her little fish
Yeah,
across
we
the
are. We're
stage.
good like that. You and me, our inner children play when we're like
Yeah,
really next to each other. We're like, oh, you want to do this together? And like that,
yeah,
the ease of which you can like go into that together. You can't find that with everybody. Did
yeah,
you ever
but
see
it is
that
it's so
quote that was
important.
like the creative adult is the child who survived? I love
Oh,
that. Right? Like, so much of our work when it's like creative now as adults is like, well, it has to be good enough to get paid for it, or why do it? But like the
mm-hmm.
creative adult that's just creative for creativity's sake, like,
Right. Wants
do you
to do
think
for
your kid
fun.
gives a shit about the Play-Doh? No. Like it's just part,
Can I
they're just
sell
making their
this
thing.
Play-Doh?
Yeah.
Do you think anybody's gonna buy
eBay.
this snake I just made? My Play-Doh log? Like,
Right? But it's
yeah,
like,
they're
how
not
good does
trying to
it feel to
maximize.
make a snake? When you're making a
Yeah.
snake, it feels great. And so it's like that's the side of us we need to like rekindle. Yeah.
Yeah, and let out. And a lot of times I think that those parts of us, like that creative expression, is often just lurking beneath the surface, kind of held back, held at bay
Yeah.
by some other protector parts that say that's not professional. That's not acceptable here. That's too
Hmm.
silly. That looks ridiculous. People are going to
Hmm.
make fun of you.
Hmm.
So
And
those are the
or
exact
with the
same
snake
parts.
example, somebody's like, no one would buy that snake,
Right.
right? Like,
I
and
don't need
how
anybody to buy
like
it.
nobody's gonna buy that.
Little
And like I
snake.
remember I had an art teacher when I was like in seventh grade that was so like, that's not how you do that. And there goes my art, right? Like, fuck it. Never mind, never gonna do art again. Because it's like one person, like, changed the way I thought about art. Like it came
Mm,
back as an adult, but like
that's
25 years or
fine.
so thought I was an idiot at art, right? So
Yep.
that happens. That happens. But I think we talked a lot about this. Is there other things you want to share before
Gosh,
we wrap
I
it
love
up?
this conversation. No, let's wrap it up. I love this.
Okay. All right. Well, if you are into all things parts and all things inner child related and you want to get in, look us up. Our info is always at the bottom of these videos. And thank you for listening. If you've stayed this long, thanks everybody. We'll see you again next time.